right, everybody, welcome. Sorry for not more notice, but that's just the way the day has happened. The day has happened to me, and the joys of living in New York City. I'm on the second floor looking out at the street, and two guys were getting into a pretty heated work discussion out there in typical kind of very classic kind of New York manner. But I was afraid it would still be ongoing when the stream started. But luckily, they I wouldn't say patched it up, but they at least momentarily settled their differences to leave me in peace and quiet, which has actually been kind of in short supply today between trucks and some kind of jackhammering work being done. Anyway, how are you? Are we setting sail for Skypea? Frederick asks. I don't even know what Skypea is. You have to educate me on that one, Frederick. Ian, howdy. This is something that's been on my mind. Something that's been on my mind. I mean, it's always on my mind a little bit, um, but I think it might just be me. Well, that's not really what I want to say. What am I trying to say here? I think often I think of hex crawling maybe in a way different than folks often think about it, or I see hex crawling referred to as, I guess, a particular sort of thing in which you're moving around, but the kind of places you're moving don't have very much relation to each other. They're basically isolated. I threw this quote in here. We'll come back to that, but and correct me if I have things astray, because I think maybe more than other types of game playing is I don't have a ton of experience playing in a bunch of people's hex crawls. I have kind of experience doing my own thing in hex crawls, but I don't have a bunch of experience just in playing every different hex crawl under the sun. So I kind of have an opinionated sense of what a hex crawl is and what I think a hex crawl can be. That in all these videos and things I kind of communicate, it's sort of obviously it's implied in the fact that, hey, I'm talking about this. This is kind of my angle, my angle on it. And I often will look at something like Lord of the Rings in terms of what a hex crawl can be, which probably is not, certainly I don't think historically wasn't, and probably is not, at least what a lot of folks played back in the day, and maybe not how people are thinking of playing hex crawls now, in which we're looking at this handy dandy map, the provenance I believe I got from Reddit ages ago, not my map. But if we look at this map, we have these areas which unfortunately were never labeled, or were not labeled at the time that I pulled the map. We have, it looks like some kind of what do we call that? I don't know, a temple complex maybe down here in a lake, and a dungeon over here, some kind of, this might be actually a village, or might not actually be, and then a dungeon down here. And that what you might see in the classic hex crawls, you kind of come down, work your way. Okay, do that, come back, then work your way down here, do that, come back, work your way. You kind of work your way around. But all these places don't necessarily, I think, often are kind of just they're on their own. Right? The religious complex is a place. Go check out the religious complex. Okay, you leave. Go check out the dungeon. Okay, leave. Whatever, this hole in the ground, this cave lair, maybe go check that out and then leave. And that's fine. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's not doesn't tend to be how the hex crawling functions in the games that I run. In the games that I run, I mean, mostly because this is how I want it to be. These things, I build relationships between these places, and not just in the sense of go to this. If you come into this dungeon, you'll get the clue that leads you here. Like there's more things going on. Right? I try to build kind of a picture of things happening that involve these places. And the hex crawling is you find yourself needing to get there, so you get there and maybe you don't know the way. All the reasons why we would hex crawl as opposed to point crawling, or both. Because I'm not someone that, I think the other thing is I think too often we put these things in all these separate buckets. Well, I'm going to hex crawl this game. This game, I'm going to point crawl. And it's like they can be used at the same time. They're tools in your toolbox. You don't have to say to yourself, in This project, I'm only using hammers, not screwdrivers. Someone would think you're insane. Why? If you have a screw, use a screwdriver. If you have a nail, use a hammer. And the same thing. If you have a situation in which point crawling makes sense, use point crawling. Situation in which hex crawling makes more sense, use hex crawling. Like I does has there needs to be no separation. You don't have to pick one or the other. I don't understand why people have to make the statement. This is a point crawl. It's like it's if that's what makes sense, great. But the moment it doesn't make sense, or it starts to feel, because I end up finding when you, and I guess I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. When you just say with your point crawl and you want, getting lost is a hazard. So you end up having to figure out, well, how does that look like? What does it look like in a hex? What does that look like in a point crawl? Because you can't truly get lost. You can't go off the path. You can kind of simulate it in a sense. Oh, I took too long. I took an extra day, but it's not really the same as really getting lost. And if you want to really delve into, well, like, how do you find it again? That you can't do that in that point crawl. You can kind of simulate your way around it. You could abstract it away into the abstract it away into the cornfield, but you can't really do it in the same way that with a hex crawl. You can really be like you're lost. You don't know where you are. You see a hill over there. There's trees over here. You hear water. Something's going on. Like, all right, which way do you go? Like that kind of thing. Like you can't do that. By the same token, if you're following a river, like here we have this red river. If you're following the river, then using a point crawl is kind of pointless, or using a hex crawl rather, is kind of pointless because if someone, as a GM, what am I going to do? You're getting lost. The players are going to know we're not getting lost because we're following the river. Can we still see the river? Yes. Is it still doing what we expect it to do? Yes. Is there a reason why we can't just keep following the river, which we know leads? We're starting up here in Palin. We know it leads to Dorlo and then Lomende. Uh, I don't think there's any reason at all. Okay, so then we don't need half the stuff that's doing hex crawl, so we don't need the hex crawl at that point. That's a point crawl. Palin, follow the river. Dorlo, follow the river. Lomende. Point crawl. We can overlay them on top of each other just fine. Don't need to choose. And I think when we do these kind of make these false choices, like it's somehow we have to have one or the other, we're just closing ourselves off to different tools. There are things that point crawls do that work really well when you're on like roads, rivers, other ways where you kind of know the way you're going, or you can only get lost so much. Like maybe you're floating down the Red River and then you're gonna have to exit the river because there's rapids and do something. You can have some fun there, but ultimately you're not really getting lost. You're getting delayed. And that's the classic. You rolled off on your check and now you're delayed. That's totally fine. Anyway, that put aside. Red Cap says, "Yep, both hex and point crawls can be cool. However, we all know pineapple should never be on a pizza. That's a crime against humanity." Yeah, I can't say I'm a fan of the pineapples on pizza. I have to say, I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but yeah, I'm not feeling that, not feeling that at all. So back to what I was saying. So I like to kind of try to connect places together. And so a hex crawl in my game is not going to look like you're going over to one location and then crossing it off the map when you've sort of defeated it and then coming back. I mean, that might be it. You might be going to cross it off, but it's more kind of living stuff. Now, it's not necessarily Lord of the Rings in that you're just moving through, you never go backwards, right? The Fellowship doesn't return anywhere except for, I guess, Bree and Hobbiton at the end. Well, I guess, well, technically they do hit Isengard twice. So they hit a couple of places, but for the most part, it's this forward sweeping journey. You're not right. You're going from especially if you're doing from Frodo's and Sam perspective, you're basically going from one end of Middle Earth to the other end. Well, not even the ends, but you know what I'm talking about. One end, Hamadan Shire to Mount Doom, and after that, that's pretty much the mostly the end of it. But I've always wanted to play with. I always wanted to play with these ideas of having these sort of larger things going on. And and again, getting on to things where I think I get frustrated sometimes with the discourse is these ideas that if you have a kind of a sandbox that you can't have, that somehow the sandbox is antithetical or it's sort of opposite of having some sort of, and I don't want to call it in a way, it is a narrative in a sense, or it is a, what that, somehow these things, have to stay separate. If I have a sandbox, then it has none of that. And if I have the kind of narrative thing, and I have, then this can't have any sandboxy things if we're having this other thing. And I always same thing. I think, well, just like with point crawls and head crawls, like you can there's no reason why you can't layer them together. And again, going through the Lord of the Rings, if you were to play it as a game and you're playing as Frodo and Sam and you start off in the Shire and Bag End, you're pretty much hex crawling a bunch of that whole thing as you're doing. And sure, there's things happening, whatever, but ultimately, if I was to pick one thing you're doing more often than not is you're hex crawling. You're forced, you're forced to stay off the roads, which forces them into the wilderness, and they have lots of little adventures in the wilderness. They see the elves in the forest, then they end up in they go around to see the elves and they have that little overnight with the elves, and they end up at going down and almost get eaten by or I guess choked. What is he? Strangled, whatever, eaten by Old Man Willow, saved by Tom Bombadil, end up in the Barrow Downs. And this is just in Fellowship of the Ring, right? Then they do finally get to Bree, but of course then they have to go with Aragorn and he got to stay off the roads again. So then they're going off hex crawling through the marshes and into the what are the names of the into some other I forget what they're like the troll. No, it is the troll something or other. I could get out a map, but I don't want to. Anyway, some hill country before coming down to Rivendell, and of course there are many other elements where they're breaking into hex crawling all over the place. Redcap says, I think one way to help with getting players to backtrack is having a season adventuring. To have a season adventuring isn't possible. Say winter and PCs need to go back to the family during that time. Yeah, I know. I like that a lot. I mean, we can get into some different things. Like, I guess I'm not like we have to backtrack, right? I'm just thinking that in a kind of a hex crawling world, unlike in a lot of books, one of the things that separates, say, a book narrative story is often that there is no backtracking. But yes, if we wanted to encourage players to go back, let's say to a safe place or town, I like that. I think something the One Ring also has that, which I also appreciate. And there was having a Yule or some kind of winter season, which I like to do in my games too. Is like, hey, in winter. So again, not to get sidetracked, but it's a very good point. In that, if you have a season, once you say to your once you kind of state this game that hey, winter, whatever, however long your winter is, you basically have to stay put. It does a couple of great things. It builds in this downtime. Let's say you have 2 months or 3 months, however you want to do it. Let's call it 3 months. 3 months of winter, and during that winter, it's gonna make total and it makes sense. People aren't gonna want to travel, depending on where you are in the world. If you're not in a tropical zone, it's gonna get less and less. Your ability to travel is gonna become constrained. You just roads can get snowed up, iced up. Rivers, same thing. Mountain passes get snowed over. Uh, it's not as easy to buy food because people are now in their winter stores, and so it's not. It's people are going to be budgeting their food because there's no farming going on, so they're going to be waiting it out. Everything kind of slows down. Everything kind of stops, and people aren't going to want to travel. It's cold, no food. Things are going to be expensive. You're not going to be able to trudge out in the wilderness as much, or your rates of travel become very slow. And of course, you're then adding into the effects of freezing cold. So there are many, many reasons why. And again, unless you're in a sort of tropic zone, if you're playing in, I feel like what most people are playing their games. And I don't want to. I guess I probably shouldn't say that, but I think that your sort of average game where you're in sort of a temperate climes. Winter's when you're going to want to stay put. It's just no one really wants to move. Everything's more expensive, and you, of course, as the GM, can simulate this by having the prices of things just go up. Oh, you want to stay at the end over winter? That's everything's high. Your food is more expensive. Everything's more expensive. Hirelings, you want a hireling to travel in winter? That's going to be they're going to want hazard pay, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and morale is going to suffer because no one wants to trudge around. No one wants to trudge around in the winter. Just imagine I mean, I've never gone camping in the winter, but I went camping in was it the not early, like mid-spring? Might even been late spring, but we got a cold snap and it was freezing. And that we had, all our modern conveniences. We weren't like a bedroll and a blanket. Like, no. Bed- I had a little if I had a little threadbare bedroll and blanket combo, I would have been like, yeah, I'm going home. Going home. Not gonna be able to do it, and I don't know how big a fire I would need to be next to, but yeah, that's not happening. So there's a ton of reasons why winter you can make this season winter as just a place where you know what, stay put. And once you do that, once you say, okay, you can't keep moving. You just can't keep bouncing around. You know, and I would definitely put this on wax for your players, for my players, the beginning of the game, whenever you want to, whenever you're engaging with this, or you want to throw this out there, you want to make sure everyone knows that you can't just keep moving. You can't just keep moving. You're going to have to get up a bankroll because over those 3 months, would be our, let's say, December, January, February. Okay, these 3 months is you're basically staying put. So now you have a goal. If you're starting your game at March 1st, beginning of spring, whatever that is, whenever you want to put it in, I don't know, whatever date, spring is spring. It finally is in the air, and you say, okay, you've got until the end of November to have your bankroll, and depending on the experience of your players and whatnot, but it's not just the bankroll for you personally. And you could figure it out. Okay, and I would even tell them, like, this is how much it's gonna cost you at different. And the other thing I would also add in here is those levels of what would you call it? Like the quality of living, right? You want to live like a pauper? Okay, that's cheap, but no one's gonna take you seriously if you're living like a pauper. You want people to take you seriously, you got to be spending money, and you got to be doing it over 3 months where you're not going to be able to get any work. 3 months of you chilling, and then you can have fun with all the social things. Oh, you want to be taken seriously by the local lord, where you're going to have to spend money to have dinners and banquets and do things like that. You want to get invited to his winter hall, right? You want to go to all that stuff. It's like, nah, you get a lot of money, and you're not getting any money in, so you're going to have to majorly ramp up. You're going to have to think about that and say, you got 8 months or whatever, 7 months, whatever it is, to build up that bankroll for all this stuff you want to do. Because once November hits, you ain't making it. And it's not just for you, right? Fighter, okay, you think you're doing it for yourself, or match you no, because any hirelings you want to keep, all those hirelings are going to go wandering off and probably not come back if you don't pay them. And especially if you have guys, I have my accountant who's here and my butler, whatever. All those guys need to get paid also. And all the things, if you don't have a place to live, if you haven't secured some kind of domicile, or maybe this is and again, we can keep engaging with it. Okay, well, we don't have enough money to start buying a stronghold. Well, what can we do? Well, we want to get in good with the local lord so that when he has his winter court, when they have their winter court, we could stay at their winter court. That's what people are trying to do. That's what everybody's trying to do. Not only is it just it's a better place to be than sitting in somebody's barn, but that's where all the deals are made. You want to get in on the action. You got to be there when the decisions are getting made. That's going to be probably the decisions for the next year. A lot of them, maybe all of them, are going to be finalized at winter court. So where do you want to be? You have to be at winter court. What do I need to be at winter court? You got to be able to do all these things you need to do to get noticed, to get that invite, which gives you lots of little adventuring hooks, depending, and lots of ways to spend money, because all that social stuff is going to be spending lots and lots of money. You can make it. I think oftentimes in the games things actually tend to be cheap, too cheap for kind of what they are. Even though we say, like, in gold pieces, but oftentimes I feel like they need to actually ramp up the prices on some of those things. In my opinion, not that not it's not about the conversion to real life, because adventures are getting influxes of coins that real life people aren't. So I always find it weird when they're like, "Well, in real life, it costs just a penny, so it should be a penny in the game." It's like, no, well, the pennies aren't worth the same. And I don't even care that much about the economics so much as that we know what you can kind of get the gist of. Okay, what are your average return on a trip to a dungeon? Kind of want to make things fit. Um, Death Cap Store says everyone wants Lord of the Rings or other Western fantasy. I mean, I know I do. I mean, I love it, and I don't. Frederick mentions One Piece. I still have to watch something on One Piece. I don't understand it. A lot of the anime stuff just, I don't say it goes over my head. It just, I mean, I enjoyed what Record of the Lodos Wars, which I think was based on somebody's, either their kind of Beck Me game, some version of D&D's game, and I did enjoy that one. But some of the other stuff, I feel like I'm not, I'm missing something. Frederick says the locals are happy to take in adventures. They're going to pay us with treasure when they hit it big. I actually disagree with you, Frederick. Um, Not that they can't. I mean, individuals might, but adventures are a big. If you're going to take somebody in over the winter and feed them over a winter, you better be sure they're going to hit it big because you don't have. You're not stocking away that much. You're not. You don't have this huge. You're just a farmer or something. You don't have a big surplus. You might be scraping it thin. So when are they going to be? When are these adventures going to be paying you back? And what would make you think they are going to pay you back? I feel like adventures probably on the whole aren't like this great, like, oh, of course they're just gonna pay me back. No, they're your average adventure is probably like a part shyster, part strong arm, part, intimidate. They're not, I would not trust adventures as far as I could throw them. Like, yo, you're gonna do this? Did do it first and show me. Don't I'm not gonna take you on credit. I'm not taking you on credit. Heck no. So, for your game, if that's how you want to play it, sure. But I do not think for me, most folks would be willing to put up with adventures. And probably most of the adventures are loud and dirty and unkind and could kill you in your sleep just as much as look at you. Um, I don't think so. I don't think I would just be taking in adventurers with open arms. I mean, that's where you can get into if you want to get into renown and these different things where these people know you. Maybe they would. Maybe you could end up where you've saved the village, right? You've done something up front, and then they're like, "Oh, we'll take you in," kind of thing, and that's fine if you have to, but you're not impressing anybody, right? At the same time, okay, yeah, you saved the village, but this is not what great heroes do, right? Great heroes don't couch surf through the winter, right? If you're so great, why are you here? Why is the Lord having a party or down there, down the street at the castle, down the road, and you're not there? You're living in that guy's barn. Like something doesn't smell right. And there could be legitimate reasons for it, but still, I think from a local person's perspective, that's what I'd be thinking. Oh, you're so great. Why are you why are you out here in the cold with me? It doesn't seem so great. This is just some cold ice water for the working man. Old House Rule says luxuries in medieval settings should be expensive, especially when imported. I sometimes place bolts of expensive expensive silk and the like as treasure. Yeah, and I think that's another thing, right? You get to really have fun with that treasure because different things can become valuable. Bolts of expensive silk in the treasure might be something, and you go back to town and you go to Ye Old Adventure Shop, and they're looking at you like, "What am I going to do with some bolts of expensive silk?" I don't know anybody who I'd even trust to do something with it. But those same bolts of expensive silk become a gift you can give a lord or a lady or somebody at the castle because sure enough, they probably do know somebody, or even if it's only aspirational for them, that becomes something that may even be worth more than its sticker price if you can get into the hands of the right people. And that stuff becomes interesting and it makes you want to think about what you're carrying, how you carry stuff out of the dungeon, since that stuff is might be really valuable in different ways and different milieus, but also awkward to carry. You can't just throw it in a pouch. Terrence says huge wheels of expensive cheese. I don't, I'm not sure what the cheese is doing in the dungeon. People get buried with cheese, but certainly if I guess the head cheesemonger of the cheesemongers guild goes down and gets buried with some cheese, you can get it fast. I guess cheese, what they can wrap it in wax, it can be good for a little while, right? Brian Smith says hunting monsters and treasure seems like an aspiring pro athlete. Dangerous. Most don't make it big, but big risk, big reward. Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It definitely is big risk, big reward. I just don't think that all the locals are just coming out to just like it's one thing if you've done something for the local folk. I could see that. I don't necessarily see it for, just like, oh, I'm an adventurer. So, oh, come in and stay. I mean, look, local customs being what they are, maybe that's a thing in your this area that you are, that there is some kind of law of hospitality that you could take advantage of. That said, I think that social pressure, which I think should be something that we engage with more, because oftentimes adventures, right? They'll be sleeping under a bridge and then walk up to a castle, bang on the door, and expect to speak to the Lord on important business. But no one in their right mind would do that. I think the Count of Monte Cristo wants to get in good with these people. I mean, granted, he wants to. they're bad people and he wants to destroy them, but he knows instinctively how to get in there, and it isn't just walking up and saying, "Lord, we have seen something from across." It's like and the guards are looking like, "Man, you smell like a wet you smell like a wet owl bear." Right? That's not how you do it. You come in and you kind of present yourself as sort of this thing that you're saying that you are. Right? So if you're a hero, capital H, um, you're not just bumming around. You're not bumming around. Brian Smith says adventurers should have badges or coins or certificates to prove it if they want special treatment. I mean, it's very interesting if you want to kind of guild eyes, make adventuring into a guild kind of thing. I've been looking at incorporating some things like that, but not the badge, coin, certificate. That then you do get into something which could be fun too. Is how easy is it to get a hold of these things, counterfeit them? Can you kill someone if it's a coin? Could you just kill an adventurer and take their coin? There you could have a lot of fun with it. It's definitely interesting to play around with what does that look like in the world. I mean, I guess it'd be good to go, and maybe it's that thing like guilds, and I guess things like the Freemasons, right, where you have to develop all this secret handshakes and gestures or whatever, because you got to find something that you would only know if you were a Freemasons, right? It's not enough just to have a Freemasons symbol on your neck because you could have just ripped that off somebody. You got to know to kind of whatever whatever the thing is that you're supposed to do when you meet another Freemason, to let them know. So yeah, you can have a lot of fun with that. Getting back to the kind of the high fantasy element here, like I said, I've always felt that you don't have to ditch that stuff in if you're running a hex crawl. In fact, I think that stuff only I find it only additive, and it doesn't have to be. I say Lord of the Rings. I think people think Sauron. They think okay, or and all the different versions of that where there's some has to be some world-ending evil that you're doing. It doesn't have to be. I mean, maybe ultimately at the end of some super long campaign, you could drive back and finally have to confront the source of evil, assuming there is one. Death Cap Story says 10 foot. The 10-foot pole is the adventure symbol. Could be. Terrence says I treat adventurers as legal and illegal, basically like privateers and pirates, but for grave robbing. That's a good way to look at it. Because that was kind of one of the ideas, Terrence, actually, that I was thinking of was this idea of sanctioning that adventures would be sanctioned or could be sanctioned, um, which is also another good way to get some coin out of people, saying, "Oh, you want to recruit hirelings in my town for some adventure? Well, you better get it sanctioned, which would mean paying coin. Otherwise, we're not going to allow you to. And then if you do it anyway, in trouble you will be." Ovaltine Patrol says, in Forgotten Realms lore, adventurer parties have to be registered to operate in Cormyr, at least back in second edition. Oh, cool. See, I didn't even remember that. My Forgotten Realms lore is basically nil. I mean, I've read some stuff. I think I own at least one of the source books for Forgotten Realms, but I can't say that it really penetrated into my brain. But it makes sense. It totally makes sense because a bunch of adventurers running amok, one, cause trouble. Two, yeah, they are winning all this coin, and why not? You're going to want to get a hold of it, right? You're going to want to get a hold of it as much as you can with taxes, and maybe you even have to get deeds, right? Who's got the rights? If you think about, you know, who's got the rights to Old Dorlo ruins? Maybe somebody does, and so therefore you're kind of building in this conflict. You have to get in Dorlo ruins, but somebody's already got the adventuring rights, the delving rights to Dorlo ruins. So now you either have to work with them, cut them in on the action, or you got to try to sneak in. But knowing if you sneak in and get caught, not only will you have to deal with whoever owns those rights, but presumably the lords and ladies of Dorlo who are handing out the rights, these kinds of deeds of rights, or whatever you want, certificates or whatever they are not going to be well pleased that you're going outside the rules. So that's certainly some way if you want to add a little kind of. I was going to say grease the wheels. Is that the right word? This thing here's something I pasted in back. So there's this concept of the genius loci. Genius, yeah, I think so. I don't know if you're familiar before. This is just from Wikipedia. In classic Roman religion, a genius loci, plural, genii locorum, was the protective spirit of a place. It was often depicted in religious iconography as a figure holding attributes such as cornucopia, patera, a libation bowl, or snake. Many Roman altars found throughout the Western Roman Empire were dedicated to particular genius loci. The Roman imperial cult of the emperor and the imperial house developed in part in connection with the sacrifices made by neighborhood associations to the local genius. These 265 local districts had their cult organized around the Lares Capitales, guardian spirits, or Lares of the Crossroads, which the Emperor Augustus transformed into Lares Augusti along with the Genius Augusti. The Emperor's genius is then regarded as the genius loci of the Roman Empire as a whole. Roman examples of these genii can be found, for instance, at the Church of St. Giles in Tockenham, Wiltshire, England, where the genius loci is depicted as a relief in the wall of a Norman church built of Roman material. This shows a quote unquote youthful and curly haired Roman genius worked in high relief, holding a cornucopia in his left hand and a patera in his right, which previously has been erroneously identified as Asclepius. I guess those last details don't matter too much. But this idea of the spirits of a place, right, which you can have, you know, overlapping each other. So what does this have to do with it? What does this have to do with anything? Well, if we want to deal with, we want to have, right, hex crawling is all about places. It's all about finding and discovering places. And I mentioned before, because I think one of the earlier videos, or not even that long ago, talking about sort of fantastic wilderness versus your mundane wilderness. And we talked about basically this same thing, though in a slightly different way, of kind of what makes these areas special. But the other thing is like, well, who or what is sort of controlling the land might not be it, right? It might be this kind of the spirit of the land, which can be anything. And of course, and like I said, you can have multiples, right? You can have, so here if we have this over, you could have an overall thing, and then each of these areas could be one, and they, the all the way up to the planet, which would be, if something were attacking that, Sauron is hitting all of Middle Earth, then whatever different things. But you can integrate that into your hex crawling in that it builds start to build out relationships between areas. What's happening down here is affecting this thing. And if you have to figure out like why is the water, I don't know what's a good example. I don't know how this I know we got into this one time before. I'm going to assume the water's flowing east to west. I feel like we're up in the mountains and this water's flowing down that way. So imagine we start off at Dorlo. So this is not going to be so much just because of the because we're on the river. It's going to be pretty it's not going to be so much hex crawling per se. All right, Smith asks, so each hex has a guardian spirit? No, I don't know. I wouldn't have to go to each hex. You certainly could, but no. But in mountains, I mean, you might have special cases, right? So going back to Fellowship of the Ring, there's the Red Horn. What's the name of the mountain? Caradras, right? Caradras, the mountain. He's a special case. He is one mountain. I don't know, there's not really a good example. One mountain that's particularly nasty, right? Old Man Willow would be like a very localized genius loci. But what I'm saying here is we can think about the spirit, and again here with there's the personification of the spirit, something like Tom Bombadil, right? In his area, he would have been the genius loci of his thing. But I think you can get away. You don't necessarily have to have the personification. It might make sense in some cases. It might not in other sense. But what I'm trying to see here is looking at this thing as a holistic whole, not just in terms of, well, they're connected to each other, duh, but in terms of that kind of like all these things affect each other. So going back to this example, even though it's not going to be, it's going to be more of a point crawl, but it's on the map. Let's say there's some evil here in what used to be this, let's just say this religious, assuming this is a religious temple complex, whatever. It's maybe it's, I don't know if this is supposed to be a ruin or it's just there, whatever it is. In our case, we're saying, look, this place got taken over, horrible spirit, horrible things happening there, whatever it is, demons, and the water's gone bad. and the water, and it's now right. It's now affecting this landscape. Things are happening, and then it's going to affect this dungeon over here. Maybe stuff's happening there. It's going to affect the woods. It's going to affect the mountains. It's going to affect whatever. And then at the party, let's say they're getting their adventure hook in Dorlo that the river's coming, bad things are happening. They have these elements, different elements that are all linking together. It's basically, hey Magnus, this concept of kind of linking together and almost in a spiritual way, in a holistic way, these different areas we have, instead of looking at them all as completely separate. Instead of looking at and saying, okay, well, the adventure's here, right? Oh, we're gonna go adventure here and done. Go back to town. Then the next adventure here, done. Like you can think about how these things might go together, much like maybe I should get a map of Lord of the Rings. Let me see if I can get a map because I feel like a map of Middle Earth might be more. Hold on a minute. Let's see if I can find one that's decent and large. All sizes I want. Yeah, give me wallpaper. We got some wallpaper. Is that how good is that one? No, it's got a watermark on it. I appreciate that they don't want me to steal their art, but I'm really not trying to steal it. Isn't there? There's got to be one. I just really just want a high res one of like Christopher Tolkien's just maps. Let me see if I can. Can I wallpaper size Tolkien's annotated map of Middle Earth? Yeah, but it's not the full map. That would have been cool. I like it, but not the full map. All right, that doesn't work. Uh, ooh, here, this might be good. Okay, I got one. I think I got one. All right, think I got one. If someone else finds one that's got a lot of stuff going on, let me know. So much for the size of that map. Actually, I think it's pretty big. I don't know if copy pasting it messes up the size, but that's okay. Brian Smith asked if I've come across influence maps like hex map with major beast territories, kingdoms, domain, and how they overlap. I mean, I think people have done those. I mean, I think they're good, right? That's where something like having an app, something is good because you can something like Worldographer or something else where you can have layers. It's just for me, it's not it's one of those things that just want to think about if you're going to have a single map, you don't want it to get too confused, right? Because you end up with a lot of information. I'm sure it's a thing. I mean, I mean, I know people put borders and things on their maps. I'll put roads and things and all that stuff on the map. People put beasties and domains. I think it would be. I'm sure. I mean, it just gets kind of complicated. And once you start having them, like, are using, if you're not using colors, right? So, just as a hypothetical, if you were using all black and white, if we take this one here and just take out all the colors, so you just have the symbology without the colors for the terrain, then you could conceivably use those colors for something else. So you could have your domains in the different colors, or you could use this may even be one. Again, this is not my map. I presume red dashed lines. I think I often see, or I use them as borders. This might actually be a border. Yeah, because here we have the kingdom of Hamel, and these other parts. So they're using so you could have red dashed lines as your borders, and then maybe even then you could have the domains of different areas, including major layers as colors, using that kind of whatever the four, the four colors from maps that you could have, so you never put two colors next to each other. So yeah, I think you probably could. At some point, you might just get it might just become confusing. That's the kind of thing I always am worry about with the maps is that it doesn't become super confusing. Oh, what was I going here? What did I want to see on the map? Oh, I had an idea. I had something I wanted to see, and now I can't remember. What was I going on about? I know I mentioned Tom Bombadil, right? So you have these areas. Where am I going? There's the Gap of Rohan. There's Helm's Deep. There's Lorien. So they were. There's Region, Tharbad. All right. So yeah. Well, let's see. So we got here. We have Hobbiton here. They cover pretty far ways. And this has got Balerion. This not to go off topic, but Balerion's totally gone by the time of Lord of the Rings. But this is a map that's put it back in there. So we got kind of a first age through the third age. Brian Smith says, would be cool to be able to select a hex and generate an encounter table based on any territory might fall in. Like if the kingdom's territory grows, perhaps half the encounter table there is safe. I mean, I think you can do that. I don't think there's anything, this is that whole thing of once you build up your encounter tables for areas, you can totally build into it some mathiness to it. So let's take your example, Brian Smith, and because I think it's a good right. So you have an encounter table, okay? So let's say your encounter tables 1 through 6. And I'm just going to do this up here, right? So you have an encounter table. Where did it put it? Oh, it's stuck it on there. Not what I wanted to do, Ouija. Oh my gosh. Oh no. You really just did that? You're gonna, boy. All right, let's try that again. Ooh, okay. There's a couple things. I love you, Ouija, but man, some of the things you do. Okay. So you have an encounter table. All right, encounter table. So let's say we're gonna have, and this is we're gonna be doing for whatever you encounter, right? So we're gonna have one settlers. I'm just being two nomads or hunters, gatherers, three. Oops. Oh yeah, three. We'll call it law. Four criminals. Five animals. Six monsters. Seven dragons. Okay. Let's just say we have that as an encounter table. And you might notice, oh, let's assume, 7. There's not a 7-sided die. No, you might roll 6-sided die. Of course, that would mean that you're not getting any dragons. But then we're gonna have something over here, and we're gonna call it the um I don't know, let's call it domestication level. So we're gonna do bullet points. So we're gonna do completely settled and tamed would put us a -2. Let's see. Settled -1. Let's see. We're on the frontier 0. Excuse me. Wild +1. Let's see. Would be wild, and then I don't know what would be after wild. What would be like really wild? Very extremely wild. Uh, I don't know. We'll call fantastic. How was that? Fantastic +2. Yeah. So you would use these tables linked to each other. So you roll on this table. Oh, we're in a completely settled, tamed area. Okay, -2, which means you're not going to get monsters and dragons. You're only going to get these guys, right? But if you're in a real fantastic place, again, scale this up however you want, right? Maybe, probably, it really should be. something like this. The route you get, the you can totally scale that up. So you can then sit there and say, okay, well, what is my level of what is my level of domestication? Am I should probably put this somewhere. Oops. Can I highlight them both? Okay, good. I'll put it here. You know, where am I? And you might even say something like this, like, oh, I don't know. You could make some calculations and say, okay, wherever the city is, a kind of a strong point, then so many things out, they get that way, right? Aaron said wild progresses to woolly. Uh, yeah, wild, crazy, wild, woolly, wild Willy. Riceman says, I love using random tables like this and really have failed to find much online about customizing the work like this. Most articles are just like how to use random tables. I hear you. But you just got to, and it's there are many ways to do it. I mean, there are probably cleaner ways to do it than this, but I like this kind of overloading sort of thing where you have kind of one giant table and then you sort of, you have you have sort of the usable range and that range sort of tilts, you know, and so you just kind of fill that up. And then each of these would be sort of, and if you like this, just for example, if you like this layout, you can then, you can figure out your die size that you want. Maybe you want to use a 2d6 to to help with the shift, so you can kind of have a little bit of that bell curve, or even maybe 3d6 for really the true bell curve um, kind of situation, and then figure that out, and then you just change those pluses and minuses to kind of tweak it. So if you're completely same, maybe there's like that monsters is still on the table, but it's really small. Like it'd probably be a good thing to try to figure out. Gamers on Game says Mole Forest, where the moles come from. Yep, the moles come from there, and then the moles go home. Not my tape, not my I found this map ages ago on Reddit, I think, so I can't take credit or blame for any of it, but it has served me well. It has served me well, but I wanna get back just before it get too far away of it on this concept of bringing kind of the high fantasy elements, which is in the title, so I hope people are gonna come here and think I clickbaited them. But my concept of high fantasy has always been that kind of the good versus the evil, right? The Lord of the Rings, I guess, for me, typifies what I considered high fantasy, which I remember at least back in the day looking at books and things. This is what was high fantasy. High fantasy was not high magic. It was high concept, or this kind of good versus evil concept. And that genius loci, the idea of the genius loci, the idea of this sort of spirit of the land that can be big or small places, is a way to a way to help think about what that might be in your scale. What is this area here? What is the spirit of this land? Like what? And it could be personified in a creature. I mentioned this multiple times. The last unicorn. The idea that this forest, let's say the mole forest is the way it is because of this last unicorn. The unicorn goes away, the forest dies, or it becomes mundane. So if there's something happening in that forest, it becomes, well, the unicorn, one way or another. If there could be, but of course you can flip it. Maybe, going back to The Hobbit, wasn't the main, well, I mean, Smaug was, Smaug was a genius loci in a bad way of that area. You got to find Smaug. You want to save, you want to, you want to clean this area up. You got to find and destroy Smaug, and all these different areas can be kind of connected. So you're coming and you run into the ruins of, well, no, I guess it'd be the ruins of Dale, right? Why are the ruins of Dale like that? Because of smog, right? Why is Lake Town on that lake? Because of smog. Why are there potentially bad things running around here? Because smog has made it impossible for anybody to take care of them. And you can link all this stuff together. Right? And I guess that's kind of, maybe it's what I'm trying to get to, right? Is you can create these unities in your hex crawl and it doesn't. You don't have to. You're not abandoning it like it matters. Like there's no pure. And the other thing is there's no purity test. Like nobody at the end of the day with your games are gonna go. This wasn't a true hex crawl because we had this or that. Like we get caught up in these kind of arguments about the stuff like it matters at all. Like it doesn't matter. Like the game's the game. But you can really kind of find unities that, at least for me, I like to find. I like it more than just thinking about all these things as being completely separate. I want all these things to be related, and I want them to all be like, if there's a problem here, like if there's a problem, something really is a problem in this dungeon, how is it affecting these other places? Because I feel like it should leak out. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, there's a whole bunch of orcs, whole crap ton of orcs in this thing, and they're just kind of sitting there. They're not moving. They're not finding this camp over here. They're not doing this stuff, right? And I know that, like, depending on the campaigns, of course, people will have that thing. But I feel like with a hex crawl, there often this is kind of siloed concept where people want to silo everything and like this thing is here and here it shall stay, and it doesn't really relate to anything else other than now it's here, and that's fine. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. If you want to do that, great, but you don't have to. Like, and I see so much of Hexcrawl seems to be around this idea of just siloing things. This is here, this is here, this is here, and then there's kind of they just sort of exist. And yeah, put them together. And if and the idea of the genius loci I find is a really powerful one. That embodying the spirit of land, what that means, what when something if that spirit is bad, what does that mean? If an evil something comes up and sets up shop as a genius loci, what is that like? And then to me, like dragons are the perfect examples of those personified as creatures, along with things like dryads and unicorns. These other things, like they come into an area and either for good or for ill, for law or for chaos, they are affecting it. And then I feel like that effect should be felt. That kind of gravity. Like what is this, what is a dragon? If a dragon like takes up shop over here or in these mountains, like what does that do? How does that affect these different areas? Again, linking these things together, it gives you reasons for you to travel different places because you got to try to solve that mystery. Maybe the water's gone bad, so you come down here. Nope, it's not here. This is an easy one because, of course, you're going to follow it to the headwaters to try to see. But maybe this isn't even the center. Maybe it's something else out in these mountains, and you got to find it. That's your hex crawling, right? And maybe you could pick up clues and different things along the way that are helping you forward. You know, just a different way maybe to look at it. Maybe I don't know, but I feel like we have to be, even if my main point I wasn't able to maybe establish it as strong as I wanted to. I feel like we did cover some good stuff. RPG Grandma says, yeah, there should be effects. Absolutely. Gamers on Game says, my best campaign had everything affecting everything else. I kind of feel like that's ideally what you want. Like that's the hardest thing to kind of manage because you have to try to keep things straight, and sort of and continually sort of update your internal map and everything. But that's when everything feels like it's real. Like when we did this thing and it's like it's spread out. It leaked out all over the place. Terrence says, Princess Mononoke comes to mind. Yeah, that's a good example, right? He's trying to track down what's going on and having to figure that out and go from place to place. And then you can start to seed things because maybe you're like, well, this dungeon didn't have anything to do with this thing. They weren't built by the same people or whatever. It's like, that's okay. But if nasty things came out of this because this lake went bad and they crawled into here and set up shop, then now they're setting up shop in there. And there should be some potentially wet, slimy trail once you figure out what's going on down there that leads you back to where they came from. Or if there was purposeful, what were they getting down here? Like, what were they looking for? And what are they doing? Maybe there's something in there, right? And then starting to think about, well, people, because the thing is also with these things, right? Is people put these things here for reasons. We don't maybe have those reasons anymore. We may not know anymore, but there were reasons. There were reasons why somebody put this dungeon in this forested hills. Why? What were they doing? Did somebody live here? Did they need to lock something up and throw away the key? Was somebody buried here with something? Like there are reasons for them to be there. So we can engage with those reasons. Or even if there's a different purpose, we can think about what is the purpose now? What are these some fishy creatures, fishy humanoids, some like Sahagwin or something. Those are more amphibian creatures. Doesn't matter. Whatever. Fish folk, deep ones, whatever or shallow ones, I guess, come out of here and they come down here and they take over the thing. What are they doing? And then how does that start to spread out? What's happening? Right. And then that becomes, and I know that the games have dealt with this. I think Beyond the Wall, I think, did a good job with mechanically this idea of going and facing. I forget what they called it, but facing off with this kind of regional threat. Maybe this is like a long way of talking about like yes, have regional threats, and the adventure against that regional threat is high fantasy because you're not you know there might be money involved, but the idea here is you're kind of taking down the threat because it needs to be taken down. And going from something very local to Lord of the Rings is just a matter of scale. And oftentimes you see that built up, right? You see, you have to take down little evils, take down little things, to bigger things, right? To boom, right? You don't take the Sauron doesn't go down first. They have to Worm Tongue has to be taken down. Saruman has to be taken down. There are all these littler ones, little, merely because Sauron is so big, but Denethor who's gone nuts and these things. And then finally, the Witch King, right? So you just be building up. But your grandma says, "What keeps happening to the cabbage deliveries to the keep? What's happening indeed?" Agnes says they built the dungeon to house a dragon, obviously. Yeah. And so what happens when the dragon finally moves in? Gamers and Gamers says political intrigue works best when things aren't siloed. Thank you. This is inspiring a new big RPG fact episode on the channel. Oh, awesome. Well, shoot me a link to it when you put it out there. And don't forget to credit me and credit me twice. That's glad it was inspirational. Um Gamers and Gamers says bigger threats for bigger heroes. Absolutely. Yeah, yes, you can start small, start big, but you can do it. You can do it. And you can do it and still be calling yourself a hex crawler. You can do it in a sandbox because one of the things I always find fascinating with something like Lord of the Rings is that while the book details one particular journey that they took, this is maybe I'm going to bring it full circle here, right? As we're winding things down. Lord of the Rings is a book, obviously, okay, and it details a particular. These people went on a particular course through the world to take the ring from where were they? I actually got to zoom out from the Shire all the way to Mount Doom and Mordor. But I don't think I'm alone in that. You can envision in part of the what makes Lord of the Rings so amazing is that you can envisage a whole different number of ways this could have gotten done, different paths they could have chosen, different things they could do, and that's to me is like that's the hex crawling part, right? That's where the hex crawl kind of departs from the point crawl in that choice of approach, and not just at one time, right? In something like the One Ring or a lot of point crawls, you will pick your course as you're starting on the map. You'll take down the big map. You say, "We're going to go here. We're going to go here. We're going here." Okay, great, great. But there's getting lost, which I think a short shrift is paid to getting lost. I think when you just have it be time delayed, because so many times interesting things have happened when getting lost when you actually deal with it. All those different things you may be peppering. I mean, look at all the stuff. Just look at all the stuff here. Hobbiton, or where did they start? Yeah, they started at Hobbiton, right? Uh, they find all these things. They find Tom Bombadil. They find the Barrow Downs. They get the Barrow Blades. That's important. All because they were hex crawling. If it had just been point to point, it just would have been different. And not that I think, uh, not necessarily. Well, I guess I would say from my perspective, a little bit worse. If it had just been a point to point, oh, you were an extra day late to breed because you missed your roll. That to me is not as powerful as now you're in the barrows and you're in trouble, but there's also this kind of reward hanging out there. If you can figure out the barrows, maybe you'll get this shiny new blade. You'll meet this ally unlooked for in Tom Bombadil. You'll discover something new about the world that you didn't know because you got lost. It's harder to do because you have to have that stuff ready to deploy. Whereas just saying, "Oops, you were lost. You lost a day," is a lot easier. But I think if you can manage the work, I think it's more rewarding. But maybe that's me. The Gamers on Game says there are more stories in Middle Earth than just that of the Fellowship. Yes, no, I know. I'm simply using them as the example of one I think that most people know about what's going on. But just the fact is that right, you have this overarching narrative, but then you have all these hex crawly elements because they are often. I mean, at least Sam and Frodo probably spend much more time off road than they do on road, right? Running into different people, running into different things. all kinds of stuff. And so I think it's a good to me. It's I guess I don't know if it's the ultimate example, though maybe it is of looking at a narrative work that has these kind of elements of hex crawling. I mean, sure, anything that goes in sort of exploration and navigation is hex crawling, but in terms of fantasy fiction, you don't tend to see it that much. I find more often than not that they tend to kind of wink around the travel, whereas in Lord of the Rings, it's so much of it. It's a travelogue, right? It really is the stories of them moving along this great expanse of land and what happens when they get around. Well, I think that's all I got, folks. So hopefully you found this interesting food for thought. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you want to give us a thumbs up, that'll be awesome. If you want to share this, I'm trying to do the push. If you guys see stuff in here that you like, and feel like other people would see, if you want to share it in whatever your forums of choice, that would be awesome to help me out. Just get the word out. Don't feel like obliged to, but if the feeling hits you, um, go for that. Other than that, really, folks, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching and listening to this. Game on, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.